There are moments in sports that cut straight through the carefully constructed narrative that leagues, franchises, and media conglomerates spend millions of dollars building every single season. Moments where the polished press conference answers, the rehearsed post-game soundbites, and the choreographed social media content all collapse under the weight of raw, unfiltered reality. What is allegedly emerging from the Indiana Fever organization right now appears to be one of those moments. And depending on who you ask, it is either the most alarming story in women's basketball this season, or a wildly exaggerated collection of misread interactions blown completely out of proportion by an increasingly frenzied online fan base. The central question driving this entire conversation is deceptively simple on the surface, but extraordinarily complicated the deeper you dig into it. Is Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White creating a hostile, psychologically damaging environment for generational superstar Caitlyn Clark? Or is what we are witnessing on sideline cameras and cell phone footage simply the intense, demanding nature of elite professional basketball coaching filtered through a lens of fan hysteria and confirmation bias? The answer, as with most things involving Caitlyn Clark, is almost certainly somewhere between the two extremes. But getting there requires peeling back several layers of sports media theater, organizational politics, and genuine basketball analysis. So let us do exactly that. To understand why this story has exploded the way it has, you first need to understand the media ecosystem that surrounds Caitlyn Clark. There has genuinely never been anything quite like it in the history of women's professional sports. The viewership numbers, the merchandise sales, the arena capacity upgrades, the charter flight policy changes, and the television contract negotiations that her presence has influenced or directly caused are not talking points invented by a fan base desperate to elevate their favorite player. They are documented, verified, and acknowledged by the WNBA itself at the highest organizational levels. When a single athlete carries that much economic weight, every interaction she has on a basketball court becomes loaded with meaning that extends far beyond the game itself. A routine timeout conversation between a coach and a player becomes a power struggle. A substitution becomes a statement of dominance. A pointed finger during a tactical breakdown becomes evidence of a toxic workplace. The cameras that follow Caitlyn Clark around arenas do not just capture basketball. They capture everything. And everything, when viewed through the particular emotional investment that her fan base brings to every single possession, becomes a story. That context is absolutely critical when evaluating what has allegedly been captured on sideline footage during Indiana Fever games this season. Because the same interaction that one viewer interprets as a coach publicly humiliating her franchise player, another viewer might reasonably interpret as an intensely competitive coach demanding accountability from her best player in the heat of a difficult game. The footage itself does not come with subtitles. It does not broadcast internal dialogue. It captures body language, facial expressions, and the visual language of emotion without the corresponding audio that would tell the full story. This ambiguity is precisely what makes the situation so combustible. When the Indiana Fever front office made the decision to move on from Christy Sides following a playoff appearance in Caitlyn Clark's rookie season, the hire of Stephanie White was framed as a significant organizational upgrade. White carried real credentials into the role. She had previously led the franchise to a WNBA championship, understood the Indiana basketball culture intimately, and possessed the kind of veteran coaching presence that an organization believed could provide stable, experienced leadership around a young superstar navigating only her second professional season. The narrative being sold to the fan base was straightforward. Christy Sides, despite overseeing a historic rookie campaign, lacked the championship pedigree and the media sophistication required to manage the unprecedented attention and pressure surrounding Caitlyn Clark. Stephanie White, the thinking went, was the adult in the room, the proven winner, the steady hand on the wheel, but coaching hires are never as clean as the press release makes them appear. Every coaching relationship is built on the complex, often invisible chemistry between a coach's philosophy and a player's personality. Some of the most successful coach-player partnerships in basketball history involved enormous friction before they developed into something productive and trust-based. Others involved initial warmth that eventually curdled into resentment as competitive pressures mounted. Where Stephanie White and Caitlyn Clark fall on that spectrum right now is genuinely unclear. But the public signals have been mixed enough to generate sustained, legitimate questions from people who follow this team closely. One of the most interesting and revealing aspects of this unfolding situation is the way Stephanie White has publicly addressed her relationship with Caitlyn Clark. In multiple media appearances this season, including a notable radio interview on the Query and Company show, White has gone out of her way to describe their relationship in overwhelmingly positive terms. She has spoken about their shared competitive fire, their mutual perfectionism, their aligned desire to push each other toward excellence. She has described loving going to work with Caitlyn every day and emphasized that their working relationship is built on genuine mutual respect. Now, a head coach speaking positively about her star player is not inherently suspicious. It is, in fact, exactly what you would expect. But the specific timing of these statements, the degree to which White has leaned into this messaging, and the context of documented sideline tensions have led a significant portion of the basketball-watching public to view these public declarations with considerable skepticism. When an organization and its leadership feel compelled to repeatedly and emphatically insist that everything is fine, it often suggests that something is not entirely fine. This is not a complicated observation. It is basic human communication dynamics. People who are genuinely comfortable in their relationships do not typically feel the urgent need to announce that comfort in repeated public forums. The loudness of the reassurance can sometimes speak more clearly than the reassurance itself. Whether that interpretation applies fairly to Stephanie White's media appearances is a judgment call that reasonable people can disagree on. But dismissing the question entirely requires a level of institutional trust that the sports media environment, particularly around this specific franchise, has not necessarily earned. The cell phone and broadcast footage that has been circulating online, captured and amplified by independent sports content creators monitoring the Fever's sideline activity, shows a coach engaged in clearly animated, emotionally charged sideline conversations with her star player. White's body language in these moments is intense. The exchanges visible on camera appear heated. Clark's responding body language, the raised hands, the visible expressions of frustration, suggests that whatever is being communicated in those moments is landing with significant emotional weight. What the footage does not show is the actual content of those conversations. It does not reveal whether White is delivering legitimate tactical instruction delivered with urgency and passion, whether she is crossing lines into personal criticism that goes beyond professional coaching standards, or whether the visual drama of these interactions significantly exceeds their actual substance. The human brain is remarkably good at constructing coherent narratives from incomplete visual information, and when a viewer approaches that footage already convinced that a toxic dynamic exists, the footage will almost inevitably appear to confirm that conviction. This is not to suggest that the footage is meaningless or that the concerns driving its viral spread are completely unfounded. Sustained patterns of sideline behavior that visibly affect a player's confidence and performance are legitimate coaching concerns regardless of what specific words are being exchanged. If Caitlyn Clark is repeatedly leaving heated sideline exchanges visibly frustrated, and that frustration is translating into compromised performance, that is a real problem worth examining regardless of whether White is technically within the boundaries of acceptable coaching communication. And the performance numbers are worth examining honestly. Games where Clark has played significantly reduced minutes and finished with well below her seasonal scoring average have raised real questions about lineup management decisions and their tactical justification. Pulling a player of Clark's caliber during stretches when the team has momentum is a defensible choice if the coaching staff has specific tactical reasons for doing so. But when those decisions consistently result in scoring runs for the opposition, and the player finishes the game with a statistical line that looks nothing like her established level of production, the defensive schemes and substitution patterns deserve genuine scrutiny. Perhaps the most psychologically layered subplot within this entire situation involves the presence of Raven Johnson in the Indiana Fever locker room. The history between Clark and Johnson traces back to their college careers, specifically to a moment during the 2023 NCAA tournament that became one of the more discussed and debated gestures in recent college basketball history. Clark's dismissive wave toward Johnson during a long-range attempt was read by many as a display of competitive arrogance, and it played out on a national stage in a way that Johnson herself has acknowledged carried real emotional weight. Johnson's subsequent involvement in the South Carolina team that defeated Clark's Iowa squad in the 2024 national championship game added another complicated layer to a rivalry that already carried significant personal dimensions for both players. The online dynamics surrounding their history were, at various points, genuinely ugly, and Johnson has spoken openly about how the social media environment during that period affected her significantly. Against that backdrop, the Indiana Fever's decision to select Johnson in the 2026 WNBA draft was always going to generate conversation. The front office clearly believed Johnson's defensive capabilities and competitive intensity were worth adding to the roster. But the decision also placed two players with a complicated and emotionally significant shared history in the same locker room, and managing that dynamic requires a level of organizational and coaching intelligence that goes well beyond simply believing that professional adults can compartmentalize their past. When content creators and fans online observe Stephanie White substituting Johnson into games at moments of sideline tension with Clark, they read that substitution as a deliberate power move rather than a straightforward tactical decision. Whether that reading is accurate is impossible to determine from the outside. But the optics of that specific substitution pattern, given the history between the two players, are unavoidably complicated. And optically complicated situations in a media environment, as charged as the one surrounding the Indiana Fever, have a tendency to escalate well beyond what the underlying reality might actually justify. Zoom out from the specific personalities involved, and the situation reveals something important about the structural dynamics of the WNBA at this particular moment in its history. The league is experiencing a transformational period. Viewership is at historic highs. Arena deals are expanding. Television money is flowing in at levels that were frankly unimaginable just a few seasons ago, and a significant portion of that momentum is directly and undeniably connected to the cultural phenomenon of Caitlyn Clark. This creates an unusual and genuinely unprecedented power dynamic between a player and the institutional structures surrounding her. In a traditional sports hierarchy, the coach is the unquestioned authority figure. Players perform within the system the coach designs. Stars receive some additional latitude, but ultimately the coaching staff makes the decisions and the players execute them. That hierarchy exists for good reasons and generally produces better outcomes than the alternative. But when a player is simultaneously the franchise's most important basketball asset and the primary driver of the entire league's commercial viability, the traditional hierarchy becomes considerably more complicated. The decisions a coach makes about how to deploy, discipline, and publicly address that player carry weight that extends far beyond the basketball floor. They affect ticket sales, television ratings, merchandise revenue, and the overall public perception of a league that is still fighting for mainstream cultural acceptance. This does not mean that Caitlyn Clark should be immune from intense coaching, or that Stephanie White is wrong to hold her accountable to the same defensive and team standards she would apply to any other player. In fact, treating a star player as though the normal rules do not apply to her would almost certainly create different but equally serious locker room and organizational problems. The best coaches in basketball history have always managed to hold their best players accountable while simultaneously protecting their confidence and empowering their greatness. It is a difficult balance, and it requires genuine emotional intelligence alongside basketball expertise. Whether Stephanie White is successfully walking that line right now is the central question that the Indiana Fever organization needs to be asking itself honestly and privately, regardless of what conclusions outside observers are drawing from sideline footage and viral content. One of the more grounding voices in this entire conversation has been Aaliyah Boston, who has consistently pushed back against the narrative that the Indiana Fever locker room is a war zone barely holding itself together. Boston's perspective deserves serious weight. She is inside the organization every single day. She is in those practices, those film sessions, those locker room conversations that no camera ever captures. When she says that the tensions fans perceive online are significantly larger than the tensions that actually exist within the team environment, that is not nothing. At the same time, veteran players on professional sports teams are almost universally reluctant to publicly validate narratives of internal dysfunction regardless of what they privately believe. The locker room code around these things is strong. Players protect each other, protect the organization, and maintain public composure even when private reality looks quite different. Boston's reassurances may be completely genuine and entirely accurate. They may also reflect a natural human tendency to present the best possible public face for something you are invested in and care about deeply. The truth almost certainly involves elements of both. Every competitive professional sports team experiences tension. Every coaching relationship between a demanding coach and an intensely competitive star player involves friction. That friction, managed well, produces championships. Managed poorly, it produces dysfunction that eventually forces organizational decisions that nobody wanted to make. Ultimately, the responsibility for whatever is actually happening inside the Indiana Fever organization rests with the people running it. General Manager Amber Cox and the ownership group made the decision to hire Stephanie White. They made the decision to draft Raven Johnson. They have crafted the roster around Caitlyn Clark and set the organizational culture within which all of these relationships are developing. If there are genuine tensions between the coaching staff and the franchise player that are affecting performance and team cohesion, the front office needs to know about it and address it directly. Not through radio interviews designed to shape public perception. Not through carefully worded social media posts or choreographed sideline moments designed to signal harmony. Through honest internal conversations, clear organizational expectations, and whatever structural adjustments the situation actually requires. The Indiana Fever have something genuinely rare and potentially historic in Caitlyn Clark. The combination of basketball ability, competitive drive, and cultural magnetism that she brings to the sport does not come around often. Building the right environment around that talent is the most important organizational challenge the franchise faces. Getting it right means the Indiana Fever could be a cornerstone of the WNBA's continued growth for the next decade. Getting it wrong means watching something special fragment and dissolve under the weight of preventable institutional failures. The story of Stephanie White and Caitlyn Clark is not yet written. What we are watching right now is a young season still finding its shape, a coaching relationship still establishing its boundaries and its rhythm, and a fan base so emotionally invested in the outcome that virtually every visible interaction gets amplified and dissected with an intensity that would be unfamiliar to almost any other sports environment on the planet. The viral footage, the hot takes, the demands for immediate firings, and the calls for trade requests are all part of a media ecosystem that generates heat and noise far faster than it generates genuine understanding. Sideline interactions that last seconds get stretched into evidence of systemic dysfunction. Public radio interviews get parsed for hidden meanings. Substitution patterns get interpreted as psychological warfare. Some of those interpretations may contain genuine insight. Some of them are almost certainly the product of passionate fans seeing exactly what they expect and fear to see. Separating one from the other requires patience, intellectual honesty, and a willingness to hold uncertainty rather than rush toward the most dramatic available conclusion. What is undeniable is this. The Indiana Fever have an obligation to Caitlyn Clark, to their fan base, and to the broader health of the WNBA to create an organizational environment where the best possible version of this team can develop and compete. Whether that is currently happening or not is a question that the people inside that organization are far better positioned to answer than anyone watching from the outside. But the people watching from the outside are paying close attention. And in the modern sports media landscape, perception and reality have a way of eventually converging one way or another. The clock is ticking, Indiana. The entire basketball world is watching. Drop your thoughts below. Right arrow should Stephanie White be fired immediately. Subscribe for daily WNBA breakdowns, Caitlyn Clark updates, Indiana Fever analysis, and unfiltered basketball commentary that the mainstream media refuses to deliver. Smash that like button.